So this is going to be a quick lesson just on that little part. We're going to do more with the next class period. But let's see if we remember what radicals are. So here are examples of radicals. I'm going to give you 4 examples. So one of them could be like the square root of 6. Notice how I read this. I read this as the square root of 6. The cube root of, let's say, 9. You could also have the 5th root of 7x squared. You can have variables in these radicals. You can have variables. The 4th root of, let's say, 10xy, things like that. So these are all radicals. Now what made them radical expressions, what made them radicals was the square root, cube root, 5th root, 4th root. That's what made those radicals. Now, when talking about radicals, it's important you know which one's the index. So there's something called the index, and there's something called the radicand. Index and radicand. So when I talk about the index is this number right here. That's that index. The index is this number right here. The index is this number right here. The index is this number right here. So in that second one I'm pointing to, what's the index? 3. What's the index here? 5. What's the index here? 4. Now, be a little bit careful with this one. The one I'm pointing to now, what's that index? 2. You can never have, with radicals, you can never have an index of 1. There is no such thing as an index of 1. Notice this is a 2 because when I read that, I read it as what? Square root. Square. When you think of the word square, what comes into your mind? What number? 2. So it's square root. So if there's no index there, it's understood to be a 2. Okay? The radicand is that expression that's under the radical. So in this one that I'm pointing to, this first one, what's the radicand? 6. What's the radicand? 9. What's the radicand? 7x squared. What's the radicand? 10x. So the radicand is the expression under the radical. Okay? Now just be aware that whenever you write the index, make sure it looks like an index. So in other words, you see this cube root of 9? Cube root of 9, whenever you write your answer, whenever you do your work, make sure that I can tell that the index is 3. So nobody has issues with radicands. They sometimes have issues writing the index. So the 3 needs to look like it's an index. See how I wrote it? Some people write it like this. So they'll say 9 and then they'll put it like here. That looks like you're saying 3 times the square root of 9, doesn't it? So just make sure, don't write this, just make sure it looks more like it goes in the index. Okay? All right, now real quick. These are the easy ones. We're going to do a little bit more difficult ones next class period. But simplify. Number 1, square root of 81. We all know what that is. You did this before. What's the square root of 81? 9. Because 9 times 9 is what? 81. Number 2. I'm not reading it out, but how do you read this? Cube root of 64. So what number times itself 3 times its 64? 4. So all these is 4, right? So what's the cube root of 64? 4. Number 3, the square root of 0.81. What do you think that is? What number times itself 2 times is 81 hundredths? 0.9, 0.9. 0.9 times 0.9 is 0.81. Okay, number 4, the cube root cube root of 8 divided by 27? Do each fraction, do the numerator first, do the denominator. What's the cube root of 8? 2. Y'all agree? What's the cube root of 27? 3. Because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, right? Number 5. What's the cube root of a negative 64? What number times itself 3 times is a negative 64? That's what I'm asking. Negative 4. A negative 4 times a negative 4 times a negative 4 is a negative 64. Number 6. What's the square root of 20? Oops, sorry. What's the square root of 25? 5. Okay. Number 7. What's the square root of a negative 25? Okay. So the square root of 25, is 5, right? Because 5 times 5 is what? 25. Now I asked this question. I said, what's the square root of a negative 25? So what number times itself twice is a negative 25? Someone said negative 5. Let's check. What's a negative 5 times a negative 5? Positive 25. So that's not true. Okay? Take your calculator out real quick. Take your calculator out. Before we do number 7, real quick, I just want to remind you where your cube root, fourth root, fifth root buttons are. So let's go to number 2. See the cube root of that? Cube root of 64. All right. So if you're not now, these would always be nice numbers. So you could end up with decimals as the answer. So you need to know how to use your calculator. Right above this this function here where you would raise to a power. See this white thing here? Right above that, you see this right here in blue? It looks like this function here. It looks like an x root right here. You see it? Okay. Now remember, to get to it though, see it's blue, right? To get to it, you got to press the second button at some point. All right, so listen carefully. Let's do the cube root of 64 in the calculator. So to put this in your calculator, you got to do the index first. So you're going to say 3. You'll put 3 first. 3 first. Then you're gonna do this, the x root button first. Next. To get to it is blue, so you got to say second, and then press this thing that looks like an arrow. You see what showed up? And then you do the radicand. What's the radicand? 64, and press enter. So 64, enter. What do you get? 4. Okay, so you get 4. Let's do the square root of, let's do the cube root of a negative 64. Negative 64. So what do I type in first if I want the cube root? 3. What do I type in next? Second. Then that little arrow looking thing. And then I need to do negative 64, right? And then press equal. You get what? Negative 4. Okay? Let's look at the square root of negative 25. I can do the same thing. Square root, I can use that same button if I want to, but there is a square root function in your calculator. But let's do the same function again just to show you what to do. So if I'm using that same function, the x root function, I'm going to press 2 first because square root means what? Index of 2. So 2 square root, oops, sorry, I did not mean to do that. 2 second, and then that x root button, and then I press what? Negative 25? Negative 25. Press equal. What do you get? Error. A domain error. Because you cannot take the even root. We'll talk more about this next time. You cannot take the even root of a negative number. You can take the odd root of a negative number, because a negative times a negative times a negative is a what? A negative, thank you. But you can take the even root of a negative number, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So what you're going to say here on the worksheet, you're going to say not a real number. That's what you're going to say. Not a real number. Okay? Not a real number. Okay, so what I want you to do is